Now that I have my own badass, terrifying spider miniature, I'm gonna need some stats that match that. And the spiders in this book, they just ain't gonna cut it. They're getting downgraded to minions, and I'm gonna homebrew my own legendary and terrifying spider boss that the players are sure to remember. So instead of heading over to the workbench, let's head over to the computer and get started. Okay, before we start statting the monster here, I want to mention a few videos that I'm drawing inspiration from. First of which is Matt Colville's Action-Oriented Monsters, and secondly, I'm drawing information from one of the Key Mechanics videos from Hank Fernale over at Runehammer. We're not going to be dealing too much in line of sight for this, but we are going to take what he says about movement in combat, and we're going to apply that to the different actions that this monster is going to be able to do. So these two videos, I highly recommend you check them out. Both great content creators with a lot of good information. But on to the statting. To generate the actual stat block, I'm using a free online source. It's tetracube.com. If you just Google 5e stat block generator, it's going to be the first result. It's totally free and it's quite intuitive. Definitely check it out if you're going to be homebrewing some monsters. After about 40 minutes of data input, the stat block's complete. So taking the advice of Matt Colville, we're going to make this an action-oriented monster. Because we're focusing on what the actions do, the battle's going to be less influenced by hit points and amount of damage, and more so about movement and how the players interact with the different types of actions. Before I cover all the actions, I should note a few of the general stats. Its intelligence is just slightly lower than average humans. This should be made apparent to the players, maybe through an NPC, so they know that this is an intelligent spider that can set traps or devise strategies to beat them. It has a +10 to stealth, so it can possibly disappear during combat, and when the players initially walk into its lair, it should be hiding. I think because of its intelligence, it should set an ambush for the players, and because of its web sense, it would know that they're entering its lair. It has its own language that I just named Arachnid, and to communicate it uses telepathy with its minions. I added Frightful Presence because, well, it's a giant freaking spider, and also that will further affect movement during the battle. So I think narratively and mechanically, it fits pretty well. Alright, now for the actual actions. It has a generic bite attack that's just scaled up from the giant spider, and also has the same web attack, except the recharge is taken away. I also added a leg attack, which is just a generic melee attack, so it does have some damage dealing options. Next we have the Paralyzing Sting, and this is the heavy hitter. This should do more damage than all the other attacks, but what makes it really gnarly is it has a very high DC. Right now it's currently set at 18. If they fail the saving throw, they don't only take the full brunt of the poison damage, but they also become paralyzed. To make sure that players weren't guaranteed to be paralyzed for the entire encounter, I did put in that at the end of their turn they can remake the saving throw. However, it's still a high DC, so it's going to be tough. This will probably happen early in the encounter, and players will know that they want to avoid this. That completes the actions. Now let's look at the legendary actions. So first off, we have the Summon Spider Spawn. I put down a once per day limitation for this, but I might change that. Depending on how the battle's going, it might be nice to have waves of enemies. I didn't put any numbers of spiders that you could use. I just put in the 3 types of spiders in the monster manual and some page references for the DM. This is something you'd want to scale to your party level and also read how the battle's going and then choose how many spiders you need. I'd recommend not summoning them until maybe 1 or 2 rounds in to surprise the players. And related to that action, we have the Command Spawn legendary action. The spider boss can command her spawn to either move or to attack, but not both, just to balance it out. And again, that goes back to dictating position and movement of the battlefield. Because this is a legendary action, she can choose to react to what's going on in the battlefield and place her minions in the right spot. This adds a level of strategy to the monster's behavior. And finally, we have the Web Grapple. This is similar to the web attack, but it differs narratively and mechanically. The Web Grapple is shot from her abdomen, latches onto a player if it hits, and then she draws the player either underneath or within 5 feet of her. This puts the player in range of the stinger, her bite attack, and her leg attacks, basically in the danger zone. This goes back to Hank's talk about line of sight. The players are going to want to go behind stalagmites or be aware of their position, not to get drawn in under the spider. That completes the basic overview of the stat block. There's a link in the description to a file in Google Drive. Feel free to use it and print out the stat block. Now that the spider has its stats and its movement-based actions, we need a map that's going to complement them. So let's switch over to a look at a sample map and see how an encounter might play out. So here we have our map of our sample spider layer. There are 6 key characteristics that it needs to have. First off, it needs to be a large space. This will allow the huge creature to move around during combat unimpeded. To balance that out, we also need narrow spaces for the players to take shelter in. I did that in 2 different ways, with a scatter here and then these narrow tunnels. When I'm describing the room, I'll let the players know that these flat rocks here go all the way up to the ceiling, so they're more so columns than rocky outcrops. This is important because the spider can't fit through the narrow spaces, so the players can seek shelter in between the rocks. Then our second narrow space are these narrow tunnels over here. The broodmother spider can fit through them for the most part, but it's going to be difficult terrain for her. So by having the large room with areas of confined space, you're going to have areas where the spider can move and where it can't. Our third feature is plenty of scatter for line of sight. The columns go into this as well, but I also have stalagmites here. Now, while the spider can't go through the columns, it can go over the stalagmites, so these don't stop it from movement, but it does break up line of sight. The fourth characteristic is a web canopy 20 or 30 feet above the ground. This is completely theater of the mind. This is going to serve a couple purposes for the spider. It's going to be a place to hide, it's going to be a place where the spiders can spawn from, and it's going to serve as refuge. During the battle, I would try to hint to the players that the web canopy can be destroyed with fire. That way, they can take away the refuge of the spider and isolate it down onto the ground. The fifth characteristic is the trap. Going back to the spider being intelligent, we want to have something that draws the players in away from the entrance. For this scenario, I have my wagon from episode 4 in its broken down state. I would put a treat in here for the players, perhaps a healing potion, anti-venom, a magic weapon, or perhaps a scroll that has fireball. Again, going back to destroying the canopy. This is going to draw the players in while the spider's hiding up in the canopy. Once they get into a position that the spider likes, they can drop down and spring the trap. Alternatively, if you don't have a wagon, you could use a missing NPC that's wrapped up in web laying in the middle of the map. But the trap reinforces that the spider's intelligent and that it's going to be using strategy. And then finally, we have just web and difficult terrain. Having web interspersed makes the players choose different routes to get to different areas based on how the battle's going. The broodmother can use her spawn to cut off certain areas, and the players are going to have to react to this. So you can see all the different elements that are going to drive movement throughout this combat, making it much more dynamic. So let's look at a couple scenarios using the mechanics of the spider to see how certain scenarios might play out. So first off, the players are going to do the quintessential D&D behavior of doing their perception checks. Now with a plus 10 stealth, the broodmother spider is probably going to remain hidden. But if the players find her, they find her, and they can spring their own trap. But for this scenario, we'll say that they haven't found the broodmother. So we can imagine the players are probably going to investigate the wagon, or fan out and explore. Now alternatively, if you didn't want to do the web canopy, you could use the wagon as bait in a trapdoor spider scenario. So once a player becomes isolated, I think the broodmother spider would descend down using her grapple, and immediately use her paralyzing sting, trying to take out one of the players. If she is successful on her paralyzing sting, I would have her grapple the player, bring it up to the web canopy, and place the player in the web. This is going to add another level of tension, isolating them from the party. I would also narrate that all the spider spawn are up there. Now, if combat does go up into the web canopy, you can just use blank bases to mark the position. These will serve as shadow markers, and you can track the movement in combat going on up in the web canopy. So let's say combat's been going on. Now the spider can do a lot of damage up close, so players are going to want to go into the safe areas. Because these are 5 feet across, the spider can't go through them, but can only reach 10 feet in. so a player will want to stay just out of reach. Now the spider does have the web grapple action to counteract this. It can shoot its web out and pull them back in. But if the players use line of sight to their advantage, then the grapple becomes less effective or not effective at all. Another action that the broodmother can use is using her spawn to get into the nooks and crannies. So for legendary actions, she can summon her giant spiders that can then go in and flush the players out. So with the spider spawn, the grappling, the large areas, and the confined areas, you can see that there's going to be a lot of movement going on during the battle. Players are going to have to interact with the environment, adding a different dynamic to the combat. Alright, that's going to about do it for this bonus episode. This type of video was a little out of my comfort zone, but I thought there were a lot of good ideas that were worth sharing about running a spider boss. And as always, if you like what you saw here, if you found it inspiring or entertaining or informative, hit that like button, comment, subscribe. I got more videos on the way. Stay tuned for episode 10 where I'll head back to the crafting table. But until then, thanks for watching and keep on crafting.
Bones of full 50 men lie strewn about its lair. So, brave knights, if you do doubt your courage or your strength, come no further, for death awaits you all with nasty big pointy teeth.
What an eccentric performance.